40% of doctors who sit the GSSE unfortunately fail. Not because they're not smart enough, not because they didn't study, but because no one taught them how to specifically study for this exam. I'm Yusuf, a Gen Surg registrar in Melbourne, and in this video I'll share 5 pitfalls that quietly sabotage your preparation and what to do instead, the kind of advice we'd share after the paper round over coffee. So if you're planning to sit the GSSE, whether it's in the near term or thinking ahead, this video will save you time, money, and a whole bunch of unnecessary stress. The first pitfall is having no macroscopic overall game plan. The most common thing I hear from colleagues is, I have no idea where to start. And that's not laziness, that's just lacking a structure. The GSSE covers an enormous amount of content: anatomy, pathology, physiology, thousands of PDFs, 700 pages in LAST itself, and without a bird's eye view, it's very easy to get lost throughout the process and lose momentum. The key is we want to build that momentum, and the way we do that is simply answering 2 questions. What do I need to cover, and when am I going to cover these topics? And that's built over looking at the GSSE RACS syllabus, looking at the different percentages of questions for different topics. For example, head and neck plus CNS anatomy is about 23%, abdomen 15%, and so mapping that accordingly, whether it's 2 weeks or 3 weeks, depending on how much time you have. But a key point is to try and gamify the process. Have a tick box or a tracking bar that allows you to see those small wins and keep up the momentum when you're 2-3 months into your study will make a world of difference. The next pitfall is having no reliable microscopic workflow. So you know you need to study head and neck anatomy, so you sit down, you've got an hour, but what do you actually do? And this is where many candidates struggle. You might open up a textbook, do some question bank questions, and it feels vaguely productive, but then 3 weeks later, you really struggle to remember anything and recall that information. So it's super important to try and develop a repeatable system for every study session. You know what resources you're going to use for each topic, how long you're going to spend, and how long it roughly takes you to cover a certain amount of content. Because without a microscopic workflow, each study session feels like you're starting from scratch, and then you end up wasting the first 15 to even half an hour trying to find the perfect YouTube video or the right set of notes. And so the solution is to have the same process, the same notes, to overcome that inertia of study. We already know how hard it is to get into study, to convince yourself after you've done a 10-hour cover shift. So we want to remove that inertia by having the same system, so that way every minute that you're studying is super high focused and high yield. The third pitfall is purely passive learning. So we've got our microscopic workflow down pat. We know what resources we're going to use, but unfortunately it's all passive. And this one is probably the most well evidence-based mistake of all exam preparation. And yet it's so common. Many of us study by just reading and rereading and highlighting notes. It feels productive, it feels like we're getting somewhere, but ultimately active learning is where the real retention is made. To recap, active recall or active learning is testing yourself, forcing your brain to recall information without looking at any answers, and it's consistently shown to have better long-term retention. And specifically for the GSSE, when you're covering so much content over many months, it really isn't optional to be passively learning these concepts. You need active recall, because when you're actively recalling topics is when you're actually learning the content. Because there's nothing worse than covering a topic such as abdomen for 2 weeks straight, and then a couple months later you've forgotten it all, and that's completely disastrous for study prep. So active learning is where the real retention's made. Pitfall number 4 is over-relying on the bank. The bank needs no introduction. It's become almost a rite of passage for GSSE preparation. And look, it definitely has a role, but I see far too many colleagues using it as their primary study tool, and that's where the pitfall lies. Because at its core, it's a testing tool, not a learning tool. If you haven't built the foundational knowledge first, you'll just be grinding question after question, banging your head against a brick wall on topics you have no idea about, and that's a really demoralizing process. You'll read the explanation, think you understand it, and then move on, but you're not building understanding. And then a more practical issue is that the bank has less and less repeats. I remember specifically walking out of my exam thinking there was maybe 5% of these questions I'd seen before. And if I'd only just learned through the bank through repetition, I would have really struggled. So I'd suggest set up your macroscopic plan, set up your microscopic plan, set up your active learning to cover the content, and then use the bank to test what you know, and that's the best way to use the bank. The final pitfall is perfectionism. The GSSE has so much content, and as high-achieving type A personality doctors, our natural instinct is to learn everything and master everything. But that will really hurt our study, and it will just make the whole process feel overwhelming and really painful, to be honest. And so it's important to keep in mind that the format for this exam is actually pretty forgiving in two ways. Firstly, the overall pass percentage for this exam is you need about 63% of this exam to pass. And in terms of the component breakdown, anatomy is 55%, pathology 58%, and physiology 60%. At least that's what it was in my year, and often it's there or thereabouts. Here are my results. And so that means approximately every third question you can get wrong, which is pretty forgiving compared to our uni exams, for example. And secondly, the vast majority of the questions are true and false, excluding the spots. So if you can recognize an answer well, and you can vibe out one or two questions pretty confidently and then guess the other two with a 50-50 chance, you're well on your way to passing this thing. So this idea of removing perfectionism impacts all levels of your study. On a macroscopic level, having a solid amount of time to study a topic, but not over amounts. Secondly, on a microscopic level, when you're sitting down for a study session, don't be too hard on yourself. Don't feel like you can't move on to the next topic until you get 100% of everything right. It's okay to be around, I'd say, about the 70% mark. And then once you've got through your study session and you've got through your topics, all the details will come later on when you're going through the bank to test yourself, as well as in the final 2 to 3 weeks, I'd suggest as a bit of a buffer to mop up all those small topics. So remember, you don't need to be perfect to pass the GSSE. So there you have it. Now you know the 5 common GSSE study pitfalls, and you're well on your way to passing first time and saving yourself a $5,000 resit bill, let alone the pain of going through it all again. And so to address these pitfalls, I actually built the GSSE Roadmap using my own notes, because when I was preparing for this thing, I couldn't find anything that addressed these common problems. So use the link down below to build your own free macroscopic study plan. And in the next video, I'll sit down and walk you through my own micro level study workflow to how to tackle a common topic. So thanks for watching. Good luck with your preparation, and I'll see you in the next video.